Welcome back to the top 20 SpongeBob episodes list. If this is a two-part series, so if you haven't seen the first part, go watch it. I'll link it in the description. But if you have already seen it, now you guys will know my top 10 favorite SpongeBob episodes. Now, let's get into the number 10 spot. And at the number 10 spot, we have the episode Crabboard from season 3. Yeah, this isn't the first robot related Mr. Krabs kind of episode, but I think this one's my personal favorite of the bunch because I think it's a lot really funny. Might as well go over the plot for this one. Basically, SpongeBob is just staying up at night watching some movies on his TV, and after seeing a robot horror movie, he then starts thinking everyone's a robot, and yeah, that phobia even comes within the work because yeah, he starts again thinking everything's a robot, so yeah, he can't really even do his job normally. So yeah, basically SpongeBob and Squidward are fucking around and shit. Then Mr. Krabs is listening to the radio, then he hears a song and he keeps going beep beep boop boop, and then SpongeBob and Squidward, or mainly SpongeBob, listen in on the Mr. Krabs, and yeah, SpongeBob notices a lot of robot traits with just the way Mr. Krabs is acting. So, yeah, he tries getting Mr. Krabs to try to confess himself to Squidward, and yeah, eventually that's to the point where even Squidward thinks he's a robot. And yeah, I think the shenanigans in this episode are very funny, and I think this episode did spawn quite a bit of memes. But yeah, I do think this episode is very funny. I think my favorite part of the episode, honestly, is probably when SpongeBob and Squidward are interrogating Mr. Krabs, and then SpongeBob randomly asked Mr. Krabs, "What color is my underwear?" I don't know. I thought that part was really funny. Also, the part where they just start destroying all his stuff was pretty gut wrenching. But yeah, overall, I thought this episode was pretty funny. Now, I do like the other Mr. Krabs robot related episode, Imitation Crabs, but personally, I'm more a fan of the humor of Crabboard, so yeah, that's why I personally prefer this one, but I recommend watching either one. Anyway, let's move on to the number 9 spot. And at the number 9 spot, we have the episode Idiot Bots. Have you guys ever ordered something online, and then when the package came, you didn't even mess with the original thing and just wanted to play inside the bots? Well, the people over at Nickelodeon decided to make a whole SpongeBob episode out of that, and it's pretty good in my opinion. So, yeah, as usual, let's go over the plot of this episode. Basically, what happens is, I think Squidward's just fucking around and shit, and then you see SpongeBob and Patrick waiting for something to come, and then Patrick makes a glasses joke that I thought was pretty funny, and his real eyes are kind of interesting, but yeah, they did order a huge TV, and yeah, it turns out they didn't even want the TV. I think they even threw it in the trash, and they just wanted that huge ass box that it came in. And yeah, Squidward is very interested in what they're doing, and by interested I mean by he's doing regular Squidward stuff and just questioning them. But yeah, SpongeBob and Patrick basically just mess around in the bots and have a lot of imagination stuff. And yeah, while Squidward is trying to enjoy his day, he starts hearing stuff coming from the bots, which he thinks they're actually making noises in the bots, but it turns out Squidward's just from the looks of it hallucinating or going crazy. So yeah, whatever SpongeBob and Patrick are doing, Squidward thinks the noises are actually happening. I also love the scenes with Squidward where one of them he actually ends up kicking the bots and then a freaking avalanche happens, and especially the point where it sounds like there's some cops outside, and Squidward thinks there's like some new bots policy where you're not allowed to kick or throw away boxes anymore. I thought that part was really funny, and some other ones, obviously, there's the imagination joke, and I also love the championship boxing joke. That's pretty hilarious, and I think at some point Squidward also ends up trying to take the bots, and yeah, he eventually ends up going to the dumpster, and yeah, the end pun where Patrick says, let's hope Squidward isn't down in the dumps today." That was kind of corny, but overall, I thought this episode was a very funny episode from beginning to end, and probably, again, one of my personal favorites of Season 3. But anyway, let's move on to the number 8 spot. And at the number 8 spot, we have the episode The Graveyard Shift. Yeah, this episode is very loved amongst many SpongeBob fans, and I do see it usually in a lot of either top 10 lists or top 20 lists, and yeah, it deserves it because it's a really good episode. So, basically, what ends up happening, well, let's talk about the plot, is Squidward is about ready to leave the Krusty Krab because it's at the end of the shift, and then some guy comes up and he has his door open and asks for some food, and then I think Squidward or the fish mentions money, and then Mr. Krabs eventually comes up with the idea of having the Krusty Krab open 24/7. And while Squidward really hates the idea, SpongeBob really loves it because, he really likes working at his job. And yeah, basically they just all start basically going insane. And yeah, eventually I think Squidward tells SpongeBob a story of the hatchling and slasher, and yeah, then eventually some of the stuff actually starts happening, and yeah, it gets to the point where some guy, I think, actually applied for a job at the Krusty Krab, and yeah, both SpongeBob and Patrick, fuck, I meant Squidward, sorry. They end up getting very scared, and it turns out just some guy with like a spatula at his hand, and yeah, eventually there's a joke about Nosferatu at the end, and yeah, it's funny. Some of one of my favorite moments in the episode is obviously you guys probably know this, but the part where SpongeBob keeps going at night at the end, and yeah, he eventually ends up staring, well, not staring Squidward, but more so annoying him. I also like, for some reason, really like the small little gag where I think the guy's name is Harold comes up to the register and he's like, "Dude, can I have some ketchup?" I don't know. SpongeBob's little moments like that do make me laugh, honestly. But yeah, I think the graveyard shift. Well, I don't think it's as good as I used to think. Or, I mean, it is a great episode. It's just not as high on my personal favorites list as it was back then. But anyways, let's talk about the next episode. And at the number 7 spot, we have the episode Krusty Towers. Yeah, I know it's a bit. This is probably the most loved, quote unquote, modern SpongeBob episode, even though the season's 15 this year. But, yeah, I know some people are actually surprised that I actually have it above some more of the pre movie episodes. I mean, yeah, this is usually in either most people's top 10s or top 20s, but usually it's not near the top 5 or this high on the list. But, yeah, personally, I really love Krusty Towers. But, as usual, let's go over the plot. Basically, it looks like a normal day is about to happen. SpongeBob and Squidward are walking to work, and when they don't see the Krusty Krab in sight, they end up seeing that Mr. Krabs actually turned the Krusty Krab into a hotel called Krusty Towers. And if you're wondering how Mr. Krabs actually got the idea of turning it into a hotel, well, basically he was at a hotel himself, and he started enjoying a lot of the stuff there. And yeah, then he gets the bill and just decides to open a hotel himself. And yeah, SpongeBob and Squidward are just casually working. Eventually Patrick comes to the place, and yeah, it ends up frustrating Squidward a lot. SpongeBob's actually fine with it because they're really huge friends. But yeah, basically Patrick starts working Squidward tired, and yeah, he really gets angry at Patrick for basically just wasting his time. And also, fuck, I'm trying to remember. I especially really feel bad for him on the part where Squidward tries to go on the elevator, but it turns out Mr. Krabs actually has an employee elevator, if you're asking what that is. It's actually just a bunch of stairs, and yeah, Squidward had to carry Patrick all the way up there, and yeah, I do really feel bad for him, and eventually Squidward just says, "Fuck it, I've had enough," and actually just quits his job and then becomes a regular citizen, or a regular hotel member. But yeah, then he applies for a hotel on the top floor, and Mr. Krabs has to fill in that space, and Squidward basically gives Mr. Krabs a taste of his own medicine, which yeah, I really like that scene. But I think my personal favorite moment of the episode is honestly probably the part where Squidward orders a Krabby Patty with some very interesting ingredients on it. Yeah, I think it involves like toenails and nose hairs and stuff like that. But yeah, overall, I think Krusty Towers is probably either one of, if not my favorite, season 4's final episode, and probably among the more modern season as a whole, if I'm being honest. And again, also just one of my personal favorite episodes of all time. And yeah, it deserves the praise that it gets for sure. And fuck, I'll even go as far as to say it's better than a lot of the pre-movie episodes, in my opinion. Although, anyways, let's talk about the next episode. Coming in at the number 6 spot, we have the episode Wet Painters. Yeah, at one point this was for sure probably in the top 3 or 5 or so, but yeah, it did get pushed down one spot, but yeah, Wet Painters is personally one of the funniest episodes of the series, in my opinion. Let's obviously talk about it. Let's talk about the plot first. Basically, SpongeBob and Patrick are fucking around and shit at the Krusty Krab. And, well, it's a slow day, so obviously they're just messing around. And, Squidward tells SpongeBob and Patrick to constantly hurt themselves. Why exactly, I don't remember. But, yeah, since Mr. Krabs doesn't want them hurting themselves all the time, he assigns them a job. What's the job he assigns them? Well, they have to paint the inside of Mr. Krabs' house. And, yeah, there's one specific thing he tells them. Basically not to let paint drip on anywhere but the wall. And he said if they do end up painting anything other than the wall, then he'll have their, let's just say, behinds up above his fireplace, which, yeah, it does scare them pretty much shitless. And, yeah, then SpongeBob and Patrick being scared, they take the job very, very slowly. And, yeah, the way SpongeBob paints, he just tries to paint as delicately as possible, but, Patrick is pretty much careless and just, basically goes through, let's just say, the more rough ways, or let's just say Patrick ways of trying to get the paint. And, yeah, he eventually just ends up pumping a huge paint bubble, which I think is, pretty funny, and then they actually end up painting most of the area pretty well, except for Mr. Krabs' first dollar, which actually gets paint on it. And yeah, basically they try every single thing ever to try and cover it up. One part in particular I love the most is particularly where Patrick's like, "Listen, SpongeBob, we're not cavemen, we have technology," and then he just starts beating the computer on the dollar. That was pretty funny, but yeah, eventually it gets to the point where Mr. Krabs does come home, and yet again they're still trying to hide the dollar, and Mr. Krabs finds out that yeah, they got paint on his first dollar, and yeah, what do you think happens? Do you think he puts their butt behinds above his fireplace? Actually, no. He just ends up licking off the paint, and he just tells them that the paint actually comes off very easily with saliva. And yeah, it turns out he was just fucking with them. And yeah, they're pretty angry, and then Mr. Krabs laughs so hard that the paint comes off. Yeah, personally, this is again another one of my favorites of season 3 for sure. And I think my actual favorite part of the episode is where I think SpongeBob's trying to paint the wall, and then a bunch of time cards happen, and then at the end, Patrick's like, "Can you move it along? I'm all out of time cards." I don't know why, I thought that was pretty funny, but anyways, let's talk about the next episode. And coming in at the number 5 spot, we have the episode Nasty Patty. Yeah, usually SpongeBob doesn't get very dark when it comes to their episodes, but yeah, this one was probably one of the darkest episodes SpongeBob has ever done. And you'll find out why in a minute, but as usual, let's start off with the plot. Basically, SpongeBob is, I guess, screwing around and shit, and then Mr. Krabs informs them that it's health inspection day, so the health inspector's gonna come over. And yeah, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs are basically really scared, and they try to, I guess, make the food as good as possible. Yeah, eventually on the TV, they find out that there's apparently a criminal out there pretending to be a health inspector just so he can get free food. And yeah, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs see the health inspector out there, and they think he's an imposter. And basically what happens is they make the nastiest freaking they make the nastiest freaking patty ever in existence, pretty much. And basically what ends up happening is they actually go to feed it to him. And yeah, it turns out he actually choked on a fly, but yeah, it looks like he was choking on the patty. And yeah, they end up finding out that the actual criminal that was posing as the health inspector ended up already being caught. And then it says if there's a health inspector, then it's not this guy, it's real. And Yeah, it turns out SpongeBob and Patrick think they freaking killed the guy with the patty. But again, keep in mind that it was actually just a fly that was he choked on. But yeah, basically they go out and try to bury his corpse so that way they don't end up getting caught or going to jail for it. And yeah, then the police end up finding SpongeBob and Patrick at the gravesite. Turns out they don't really try to arrest them. It's just that they want them to get the Krabby Patties. And yeah, it turns out the body keeps freaking following them. And yeah, basically they try to hide it as best as they can so that the police officers don't know. Then, towards the end, the health inspector comes back to life, and yeah, they think it's a zombie, but yeah, it turns out even though SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs fed him a freaking Krabby Patty that could have nearly killed him, they ended up passing the health inspection anyway. And yeah, that's basically the episode. Yeah, this episode was a bit darker than some other small episodes, but at the same time, it's probably one of the funniest episodes in the series, in my opinion. It's kind of hard for me to honestly come down to what my favorite joke is, but yeah, I just think the episode is really funny throughout. But yeah. Anyways, let's talk about the next episode. And coming in at the number 4 spot, we have the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5. Yeah, the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes tend to be among my favorites in the series, and yeah, I do think most of them are very good in my opinion. Crap, I think I have the third one a little bit lower on the list, but yeah, if you're curious what my favorite one is, it is the 5th entry in the series, and yeah, it seems to be a fan favorite among a lot of fans, and yeah, I can definitely see why it's fucking amazing. But as usual, let's talk about the plot. Basically, there's a huge freaking line at the Krusty Krab, and take a guess who's holding up the line? Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Mainly Mermaid Man, because yeah, he's taking forever to decide, and yeah, eventually gets to the point where Mermaid Man orders something for Barnacle Boy, being the little kitty meal, and yeah, Barnacle Boy has had enough of their shit, and yeah, he says he just wants a regular Krabby Patty, because I mean he's 68. What do you expect? He's a grown ass man, but yeah, they keep making fun of Barnacle Boy and making him look like a baby. Pretty much everyone, not just Mermaid Man or Squidward, but yeah, then Barnacle Boy gets pushed to the limit, and then he ends up joining the League of Villains, or whatever the crap it is. Basically, he just joins the Dirty Bubble and Man Ray, and yeah, basically, Mermaid Man goes out and tries to stop the evil, and yeah, he finds out he's too outnumbered, so basically, he gets basically the whole cast, if I'm not mistaken, except for Mr. Krabs, of course, does. I mean, I take it that's why he wouldn't, but yeah, basically the main cast becomes the superheroes of the IJLSA, or they basically adopt their costumes, and yeah, a lot of it's pretty funny. Yeah, eventually it gets to the point where they just find Barnacle Boy and the other villains basically harassing some other fishes at a drive-in or something. Yeah, it turns out one guy's making out with his pillow, but yeah, then Mermaid Man and the rest of the members join in, and yeah, basically a huge showdown happens, and yeah, let's just say they're less than stellar in the fight. Yeah, they may have really good powers at their disposal, but yeah, they're pretty incompetent when it comes to actually using them. And yeah, the villains end up winning by literally doing nothing. And yeah, they due to superhero supervillain roles, Barnacle Boy does have Mermaid Man given to his demands, and instead of actually just trying to rule the world or some other shit like that, Barnacle Boy just wants an adult-sized Krabby Patty to stop being treated like a little kid and to be called Barnacle Man. And yeah, they just end up reuniting just because Barnacle Boy just wanted some little stuff, and yeah, everything's back to normal at that point. This is yet again another episode where the episode just has way too many good moments for me to choose what my favorite moment is. And yeah, like I said, this is probably another one of the most consistently funny episodes in the series. And yeah, it's definitely my favorite Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes. Not episode. Not because the other ones are bad, it's just this one is so damn good. And yeah, this is probably in the top 3 of my favorite season 3 episodes, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, anyways, let's talk about the number 4 pick. My bad, I meant number 3. Anyway, at the number 3 spot, we have the episode No Weenies Allowed. Yet again, here's another one of my favorite Season 3 episodes and one of the most consistently funny ones in my opinion. The plot of this episode revolves around SpongeBob and Sandy just fucking around and shit at Goo Lagoon, fighting each other with karate. And eventually, SpongeBob gets his ass hit to a place called the Salty Spittoon, or more so at a buff guy. And it turns out there's a club named the Salty Spittoon. Quote, the baddest of the baddest, only the baddest get in. And SpongeBob and Sandy try to get into the club. Sandy actually gets in, no question, but SpongeBob, it turns out he can't even take off a cap off a bottle of ketchup. And the muscle dude ends up directing him to Weenie Hut Juniors, and I think SpongeBob ends up going there, and he finds some other guys who are actually voiced by some of the writers, if I'm not mistaken. And SpongeBob is very convinced that he's, quote, not a weenie, so he basically just tries everything he can to get in, and some of the hijinks, again, in this episode are pretty funny. One of my favorite ones, honestly, is where he tries to be a tattoo on a guy, and he starts dancing. Another one is where he gets a wig, and it turns out there's also another sponge that has a wig too. Probably my favorite joke in this episode, if I'm being honest, is where SpongeBob's at the back of the line, and there's these two guys arguing, and he's like, "You calling me a liar? I ain't calling you for dinner," and I think that's pretty funny, and SpongeBob ends up getting into a scrap, and then eventually, after constantly failed plans, SpongeBob gets Patrick for advice, and I really like the plan Patrick actually uses. Basically, Patrick devises a plan where him and SpongeBob pretend to fight, and then when they rumble and Patrick offers to lose right on the bat to let SpongeBob win so he could get into the club, and that way it helps him get into SpongeBob into the Salty Spittoon. And the actual fight that happens is pretty funny in my opinion. It did spawn this legendary moment where Patrick just called Tubby, and then he's like, "Nobody calls me Tubby," then freaking not SpongeBob down. And the part that amazes me about that is Patrick actually manages to beat himself up, which is honestly quite impressive in my opinion. And SpongeBob does get into the club, but he ends up going to the paramedics because he ran in and slipped on an ice cube, which is pretty freaking funny. But and then even the doctor makes fun of SpongeBob, saying he has to go to freaking Weenie Hut General to get medical care. But overall, yet again, another episode I find pretty freaking funny in my opinion. And this is for sure probably my second favorite Season 3 episode, but not my second favorite episode in general. Let's actually move on to my number 2 episode. And coming in at the number 2 episode, and my second favorite episode of the series, we have the episode Sailor Mouth. Yeah, this one's honestly always been one of my personal favorites, and I didn't really realize how much I loved it until I actually started planning this list, and Sailor Mouth has got to be one of the funniest episodes of the series for sure. Anyways, let's talk about the plot. Basically, SpongeBob and the rest of the crew are screwing around and crap, and SpongeBob gets the job of taking out the trash, and when he actually goes to take out the trash, he finds the trash bin and he sees a lot of words spray painted on there. One of my personal ones, honestly, is probably nematodes or people too. It's not a huge one, but there's also the Squidward smells good one. But then SpongeBob actually finds an interesting word on the bin, and it turns out it's saying crabs is I don't know what it says because they bleeped it out, obviously, but then Patrick comes out of nowhere, and when SpongeBob asks them what that special word means, Patrick says it's a sentence enhancer, and they end up start cursing a lot, and one funny piece of trivia in my opinion is apparently they actually had the voice actors actually swear a lot, and I bet it probably would have been pretty freaking funny if you were actually there, but then SpongeBob and Patrick start overusing curse words inside of the Krusty Krab with people working, and I think there was a meme that spawned from this one, but basically they start cursing everywhere, and then the Krusty Krab starts losing customers. Then Mr. Krabs gets on their case about using those words because it's called because they're bad words, and when they actually end up swearing not to keep swearing, then Mr. Krabs tells them about the 7 bad words, and then SpongeBob and Patrick try to play some a game called Eels and Escalators, which I think is another version of Chutes and Ladders, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, SpongeBob keeps getting freaking eels, and then he ends up cursing, which honestly is understandable, because yeah, if you keep getting frustrated, usually you'll probably swear because you're angry, but yeah, Patrick runs to tell on SpongeBob, and yeah, they both end up going to the Krusty Krab, and then they both end up swearing, and then yeah, Mr. Krabs made some dough, I think paint the Krusty Krab, and then yeah, then Mr. Krabs hits his foot on a rock, and there spawns my favorite part of the episode. I did think the 40 lashes joke was pretty funny, but my favorite part is where Mr. Krabs goes on that huge ass fucking cursing spree. I thought that was freaking hilarious, and yeah, and then SpongeBob and Patrick go to tell Mr. Krabs' mom, and then yeah, they all start swearing, and then they all have to paint the house, and then it turns out when it looks like his mom is swearing, it turns out it's just Old Man Jenkins in his freaking car, which makes a lot of noise. Yeah, there are a lot of different Old Man Jenkinses in the Bikini Bottom, which I think is pretty interesting. But yeah, Sailor Mouth, in my opinion, is just one of the again, another really funny episode. And yeah, I do think it is kind of relatable, I guess, too. But yeah, I don't think relatability completely matters to make an episode good. But yeah, Sailor Mouth is one of my personal favorite episodes, of course, of the series, and without a doubt, my favorite episode of season 2. But again, it's not my favorite episode of the show. If you're curious what my favorite episode of the show is, well, let's talk about it. And at the number 1 spot, we have my favorite SpongeBob episode of all time, the camping episode. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily the best SpongeBob episode in my opinion, but it is my favorite one, and I'll explain why in a minute, but first let's go over the plot. Firstly, Squidward is excited that he gets to have a chill time at his house, considering SpongeBob and Patrick are going camping. Then they find out that SpongeBob and Patrick are just camping a couple feet from his house, or a couple feet from SpongeBob's house, and then Squidward goes full-on gatekeeping mode and says, "It isn't camping if you're 5 feet away from your house," or something like that. Then SpongeBob and Patrick challenge Squidward, and he obliges, because, yeah, he tries to set up his own camping tent, and, in natural SpongeBob fashion, Squidward pretty much fails miserably, while SpongeBob and Patrick have a really fun time camping. And then it gets to the point to where Squidward is actually, I guess, having a good enough time camping and setting up his stuff well. And then you have SpongeBob singing the campfire song, which is pretty famous. And then something happens to where SpongeBob and Patrick tell Squidward about the sea bear, because I think he was doing something that would trigger the sea bear to attack. But, yeah, Squidward doesn't believe it because he just thinks it's a myth. And then there's, like, some little gads about, like, Fake Science Monthly or something like that. And then, yeah, Squidward asks how to trigger a sea bear attack, because he obviously doesn't believe it. And then he starts doing everything that would trigger a sea bear attack. Then it actually attacks, and then it turns into a game of Squidward trying to, I guess, protect his own life from the sea bear, because, you know, he doesn't want to die. But, yeah, the main reason, why this is my favorite SpongeBob episode, it's mainly because I just find it the most entertaining one to watch, and I do think it does have a lot of funny moments, in my opinion, and I also love the campfire song. I mean, who doesn't? But, yeah, this is probably, I guess it's just my favorite one, because it's the one I like watching the most. Anyway, guys, I am the Perpetuating Party of Patricks, and see you guys in the next video.